Henry Creel, later known in the Hawkins lab as 1, was born in 1947 to father Victor Creel, mother Virginia Creel, and sister Alice Creel. I'm calculating his birth year based on this newspaper clipping, which states that he was 12 when his family was killed in 1959. However, his sister, who appears to be much smaller than him, is listed as 15 years old in the same paper, so who knows for sure. To make things more complicated, this seems to contradict the supposedly canon play about Henry's backstory, Stranger Things: The First Shadow. Because of this and a lot of other issues with The First Shadow, which I'll get to, I'm going to consider the play soft canon, meaning the broad strokes can be taken into account, but the specific details aren't necessarily canon. Think of it like this: when you watch Stranger Things, you're seeing the true events play out. But when you watch the play, it's literally a retelling, meaning that certain details could be fudged or dramatized. For this video, I'll try to only include the play details that make sense with the Stranger Things canon. Henry initially grew up in Lincoln County, Nevada, which was the home of a military base where an experiment called Project Rainbow was taking place. The goal was to achieve invisibility in a US warship using a surge of electromagnetic energy. Henry became a Boy Scout and enjoyed exploring the caves found in his vast high desert backyard. Around the time of Henry's 8th birthday, so 1955 if we believe the newspaper, the government successfully made the USS Eldridge disappear momentarily. But what they didn't realize was that it wasn't actually invisibility. It was transported through a wormhole to another world where it was promptly attacked by monsters. There was only one survivor. His name was Captain Brenner. We can speculate that he recovered a previously undiscovered element, a rock from the foreign world that I'll refer to as the alien rock. Captain Brenner was essentially turned into a vegetable though, and his son, Dr. Martin Brenner, worked at the military base where a series of tests were run on him to try to figure out what exactly happened. Yes, this is Brenner. He aged a lot in a very short period of time after this, as per Stranger Things tradition. But one of the doctors working on the case with him was a Russian spy who stole the alien rock and tried to get away, but was attacked and wounded by the military during his escape. He was able to evade them by hiding in the cave system where he encountered Henry, but perhaps delirious from the blood loss or the effects of the stone, he mistook Henry for one of the agents that were after him.
How did you find me?
Henry tried to help that man, but the Russian spy shot him in the left hand, a body part that would become very significant to Henry going forward. Realizing the stranger can't be convinced, Henry takes action to save himself by bashing the dude's head in with a rock before he has a chance to fire another shot. His curiosity gets the better of him, so Henry opens the briefcase and touches the alien rock. Maybe it's charged with the same energy that made the ship disappear, or maybe this rock is an organism that's part of the hive mind of creatures from this other planet. But whatever it is, it imbues Henry with a special energy, allowing him to see into this mysterious planet, which later becomes known as the Abyss. There, he telepathically connects with a sentient dark cloud, which leaves him with a simple message: find me. The Russian spy tries to warn him to resist, or it'll consume him. But being just a kid, it's easy for the cloud entity to manipulate Henry to telekinetically burst the man's eyes open. This cloud would later be known as the Mind Flayer, and Henry's mind had just been flayed. But the whole experience was so traumatic that he blocked it out from his memory. But the effects of being flayed are still noticeable. Henry begins exhibiting telekinetic powers, discovers that he can spy on people via astral projection, and becomes obsessed with a Captain Midnight radio, which seems to allow him to receive transmissions from the Mind Flayer that others cannot hear. I had no idea that a Captain Midnight radio was even a real thing. I thought it was just that guy who talks about The Office on YouTube.
Captain Midnight.
I like that guy. He thinks it's the 1950s or something. All of this strange behavior led Henry to being labeled as a freak at school. Henry's father would later describe him as sensitive. Henry would refer to himself as different, and Henry's early teachers and doctors would say he was broken. Eventually, some combination of the ostracization by the other students and the personal torment by the Mind Flayer led to an altercation with another boy at school, where the other boy loses an eye. After this, he's pulled out of school, and his parents do everything they can to try to fix his behavior, which apparently included an exorcism, limiting his time with the radio.
Turn off the radio, boy. What you said. I said.
And training him to believe that his visions of the Mind Flayer are just nightmares and that he's actually normal. Take it from me, Henry, sometimes it's just better to accept that you're not normal. None of these remedies were enough to make anyone in Nevada less suspicious of him though. So in 1959, they packed up and moved to Hawkins, Indiana, hoping for a new start. To find out how Henry evolved to become the monster known as Vecna, how Vecna is actually the inverse of 11, the cues taken from Freddy Krueger, what you don't know about the lore Vecna is based on, and so much more. Stick around to the end of this video. This video is sponsored by Chime. Welcome to Henry History. I mean Hawkins history. I mean horror history. Let's start over. Vecna is known as the main antagonist of Stranger Things, but Vecna is not the monster's actual name. Like many other monsters in Hawkins, such as the Demogorgon and the Mind Flayer, its name is given by a group of kids pulled from their Dungeons and Dragons game manual. In the game, Vecna is described as a creature with rotting skin that lives despite being previously killed, running an entire civilization through his power. In the Dungeons and Dragons user manual, Vecna started out as a wizard or spellcaster. He was already very powerful, but then Vecna became what's known as a lich.
An undead creature of great power.
Within the lore of D&D, Vecna's physical body is destroyed, only leaving his left eye and left hand. When he takes on his godlike form, his eye and hand are still said to be missing. Within the D&D lore, Vecna also has a right-hand man, known as Cass, who becomes his betrayer. So, just based off of that, there are a lot of similarities to the Stranger Things version of Vecna. He tries to recruit Eleven as sort of a disciple, and she betrays him. His physical body is destroyed when he's defeated and banished to the abyss, and he's transformed into this divine sort of form, where we can see his left hand turns into a huge claw, mirroring the asymmetry of the hands found in the D&D version, and showing how he's turned his repressed feelings about the gunshot incident in the cave into a tool of destruction. Like most things that happen in Hawkins, Henry lives up to the lore of the Dungeons and Dragons character associated with him, in more ways than one. To understand Henry's transformation into Vecna, we'll have to take it back to 1959, as the Creel family tried to settle into Hawkins. Have you ever bursted a blood vessel? I haven't, but I've come pretty close a few times seeing how some of these traditional banks treat their customers. That's why I'm done with the stress. I'm teaming up with today's sponsor, Chime. Chime is a fresh approach to online banking that doesn't rely on fees and can help you build your savings faster. An account with Chime gives you all the benefits of a virtual bank, like high APY savings if you set up direct deposits and zero maintenance fees. And you get these benefits without having to give up important features and perks, like 24/7 live support with a real human, access to 47,000 fee-free ATMs, and a virtual and physical debit card so you always have access to your money. It sounds ridiculous, but it's actually so satisfying just opening up and using the Chime app, because everything you need is right there. You got your balance on the first tab, you can transfer funds on the second tab, and pay people on the third. It's convenient, it's secure, and it's backed by banks that are FDIC insured, so you know your money is safe. You know how most of these YouTube ads just give you a discount on your first month or something? Well, Chime has no monthly service fees, so they're just giving you up to $350 for opening an account and setting up direct deposits. Just use my link in the description and get ready to bank smarter with Chime. On the surface, the Creels embodied the ideal nuclear family in 1959, and with that came their move to the newly developed and at that time, substantially wealthy Indianapolis suburb of Hawkins, Indiana. We don't know where they moved from, but Victor describes how many families in the 50s were leaving cities and moving to the suburbs, which were seen as the ideal place to raise a family. The Creels had inherited a small fortune from the death of Virginia's great uncle, and they seized the opportunity to buy a big, beautiful house. Alice even describes their new home as seeming like something from a fairy tale, and exclaims that she can't believe it's so big. However, Henry would recount a very different reason for their move. His teachers and doctors described him as broken, leaving his parents to hope that a change of scenery would fix his issues. It's possible that both suburban sprawl and a change of scenery for Henry were factors in the move, but Victor only cited the former in order to try and save face. The specifics of Henry's behavior problems as a child are not described in detail, only that he was different and had trouble fitting in with the other children. He was a little freak, just like the person watching this video, but the way his behavior was perceived is typical for the time period. One subtext I've analyzed in many of my Stranger Things episodes is the fear of spreading communism after World War II in what was called the Red Scare. This would be right when Henry was born. The idea of not conforming to American values or doing anything outside of what was considered normal would lead others to fear you and eventually associate you with those evil commies. Obviously, there's a metaphor here. They weren't literally accusing a little kid of being a communist. My point is that weird behavior back then was not tolerated like it is now in the age of the internet. It would make sense that the Creels would want to leave that notion behind and get a fresh start. However, Henry was the one member of the family who was less than thrilled about the move to Hawkins. He would later balk at his parents' hope that a change of scenery might cure him, stating,
"It was absurd. As if the world would be any different here."
Henry describes finally feeling a connection to another living thing when he discovers a nest of black widow spiders in one of the bathroom vents in the house. He explains that while most people are afraid of spiders, he saw them as something that gave him comfort.
Like me, they are solitary creatures. and deeply misunderstood.
He started collecting them in jars and kept them in the attic to study, where he drew detailed drawings of them. He saw them as the ultimate predator that fed on the weak and kept the ecosystem in balance until humans came along and threw everything off. Not exactly how that happened, but whatever. To Henry, the average person was just a pest, and human civilizations and concepts of time were all things that he felt entrapped by. He describes this as a deeply unnatural structure.
Where others saw order, I saw a straitjacket.
It was with this discovery that Henry further honed his special abilities. While staring at the grandfather clock in his family's house, Henry describes that he's able to move the hands around with just his mind. From there, he went on to discover even more new abilities. He could infiltrate the minds of his family members and manipulate what they were seeing, forcing them to hallucinate. As you can imagine a troubled kid would, he immediately started using his powers in the worst ways possible. If we are to believe what happens in Stranger Things: The First Shadow, Victor and Virginia tried to enroll Henry in school at Hawkins High, where he met and connected with a girl named Patty Newby, who claimed to be an adopted orphan. Because they were both social outcasts, the two connected and started dating while they both rehearsed to appear in the school play directed by Joyce Byers. There are a lot of issues with this though, primarily that Henry would have only turned 12 in 1959, not old enough to attend high school. Not to mention that those involved in the Hawkins High School play, like Joyce Byers, Jim Hopper, and Karen Wheeler, never mentioned that they remember who Henry Creel is years later when they discover that he's Vecna, despite there being a huge incident involving Henry that they definitely would have remembered. I'll get more into it later, but basically I think he may have wanted to be in a school play, but the details about who else was involved were more of a fantasy version of the events in Henry's mind. First Shadow depicts the other cast members' pets being killed over a 9-day period as a result of Henry's astral projection each night. The Mind Flayer basically forces him to do it, and there's nothing that he can do to stop it. He's caught by his mom sneaking into the attic one night, and she forbids him from seeing Patty, worried that he might still be a threat to her. Make up your mind, lady, do you want him to believe that he's normal or not? She ends up slapping him, and he basically goes psycho and grows these spider-like legs out of his back that take over his body, symbolizing his loss of control to the Mind Flayer. Later, he tries to help Patty Newby find her real mom using astral projection, but the girl's father, Principal Newby, discovers them, and Henry is once again taken over by the Mind Flayer, who uses him to attack and blind Principal Newby.
You can't have our CZsWorld. Henry, now!
The incident prompts Mr. and Mrs. Creel to bring out a specialty doctor from Nevada who believes that he can help Henry, but it's really just Dr. Brenner posing as a medical doctor to get a chance to study Henry. Brenner sees the opportunity to learn more about the Abyss and the powers that Henry seemed to inherit from the Abyss. Since the Principal Newby incident, Henry struggled to hide his powers, killing birds, squirrels, and the family rabbit. He describes seeing himself as a predator, much like the Black Widows, but in Henry's words, a predator for good, which seems like a stretch unless you have something against CGI bunnies. Although it seems he initially tried to fight the control of the Mind Flayer, as explained by Principal Newby,
The boy saved me from it. He can save all of us.
I think the continued torture bends Henry to the Mind Flayer's will, as he begins to see things the way that the Mind Flayer wants him to see things. In Henry's logic, he likely justified this as seeing himself taking out something weak, just as a spider would, and keeping the ecosystem in balance. But rabbits and small animals weren't the only targets for Henry's torture. He began tormenting his own family by being able to infiltrate their thoughts and cause horrifying hallucinations, bringing back terrible memories, such as his father's time in the war, and taunting his mother by showing her spiders coming out of her bathtub drain. We don't know specifically what he torments his sister with, but it looks terrible. Henry's justification for doing this was that he felt his family deserved it. He could see their thoughts, so he could see what his parents' motivations were, and it reflected Henry's own issues with not being able to fit in with societal standards and what was expected of the traditional nuclear family at the time. He realized that his own parents didn't fit within this standard and resented them for trying so hard to. Henry states,
I saw my parents as they truly were. To the world, they presented themselves as good, normal people, but like everything else in this world, it was all a lie. A terrible lie. They had done things, 11. Such awful things.
In the case of Victor Creel, the awful thing that Henry found as he explored his dad's mind was an incident that happened when Victor was serving in France during World War II. Victor had ordered the bombing of a French home where he thought German soldiers were hiding, but instead killed an innocent family. After walking into the wreckage, he witnessed a baby burning to death in its cradle. Victor would later describe carrying the guilt of this with him through his entire life, causing him to recoil at the sight of a baby carriage. Henry believed that his father was a hypocrite for trying to live the American dream when he had done something so awful, and felt justified in tormenting him. Henry became obsessed with other people's negative thoughts or things that made them feel guilty. As Henry put it himself,
I showed them who they really were. I held up a mirror.
His sister Alice is described as being innocent by their father, but Henry likely saw her as weak, as he did with the rabbit, and felt justified in torturing her. Victor did not recognize that it was his own son causing this hellscape, but believed that they were being tormented by some unknown demon. Henry's mom, however, knew that her boy was the source of their problems, even if she couldn't prove it. She's the one that brought in Dr. Martin Brenner to study Henry, but she didn't understand Brenner's true motivations, which were about as obvious as his actual hair color.
The United States government has big dreams for you, Henry.
Just what every kid wants to hear. They tell him that they're building a map of his brain and body, but during the experimentation, Henry hears a voice which tells him to let us in.
In Hawkins, you're nothing. With us, you're a god.
Brenner also encourages Henry to give in, thinking it'll lead to scientific discovery. So, while Henry looks like he's jamming out to the hottest hip-hop mixtape of 1959, the first ever gates to the Abyss opens, and Dr. Brenner gets a brief glimpse at a Demowog, one of the creatures who attacked his father's ship. The results of the spasm that this causes Henry are devastating, but Dr. Brenner doesn't seem to care and just wants to push further, and seems to be pushing Henry to use his powers to execute a death row inmate. He tries to withdraw himself from the experiment, but Brenner has other ideas.
You think you can go live a regular life?
The same thing happens to me when I try to stop working on videos for 5 minutes, but Brenner coaxes him and pushes him into a deeper and deeper rage. He attacked Brenner and another scientist and escaped back home. At home, he discovered that his mother believed that Dr. Brenner could fix him, and this sent him into a panic. He turned on the radio with his mind and started changing the channels until he reached one with static, likely helping him do what he did next. As Victor got up to investigate the radio, Henry sent his mother into the air where he squeezed her brain, making her eyes ooze blood and broke her bones before dropping her into the dining room table. In the past, I've talked a lot about how Stranger Things is heavily inspired by Stephen King, with Eleven's powers being reminiscent of Carrie, and this is also a very similar kill to one from the Carrie novel, where she uses her telekinesis to bring her mother's heart to a stop. Henry describes that he could feel himself becoming stronger after each kill, as if he was absorbing some part of each victim. Victor, who had no idea it was Henry who just killed his wife, grabbed the two kids and ran to the front door. Before he could open it, Henry sent him into a trance and made him relive the most horrifying moment of his life, watching the baby burn to death. As Victor was locked in this horrible memory, Henry killed Alice in the same way that he had just killed his mother. But, as Henry himself would describe, he had pushed himself beyond his limit, causing himself to fall into a coma, releasing Victor. Victor was arrested for murdering his family and sent to Penhurst Asylum after pleading insanity at his trial. He probably actually believed he was insane based on what he had seen. Henry credited himself with framing his father, but stated that despite this, he was far from free. When Henry awoke from his coma, he was now in the exact prison that he feared, under the care of Dr. Martin Brenner, who would insist on being called Papa, which makes him sound less like an esteemed government scientist and more like a twisted cult leader. One thing we can credit Dr. Brenner for is the fact that for the next 24 years, Hawkins remained relatively safe from Henry. However, because of Brenner's desire to mass-produce children like him as a potential weapon against the Soviet Union, Henry's power was kept intact, and he became literally and metaphorically a ticking time bomb hidden away under the town. Henry was taken into Hawkins' lab during the height of the Cold War. I've talked about the Cold War in the horror history episode on Alexei. The Cold War was a tense rivalry between the United States and the Soviet Union, where the threat of nuclear attack was always looming. The Cold War led to fear of the spread of communism throughout the United States. It caused an arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union, and one of the many occurrences during this time was the development of the MK-Ultra program. The same program in which Dr. Brenner found Henry to be a sort of superweapon. As Dr. Brenner studied him, he must have realized that there was something different about the composition of his blood, that Henry had a completely unique blood type, and eventually figured out that transfusing Henry's blood in pregnant women could help him breed new super soldiers with similar abilities. He started a new program, his own little MK-Ultra, testing on volunteers who would later have children, which Dr. Brenner would keep under his care at the Hawkins lab to study and train them to be used as super soldiers. Because Henry was the first, Dr. Brenner tattooed the numbers 001 onto his wrist to help keep track of each of them. Although there are 18 subjects that we know about, the fact that there are 3 digits used in the numbering system implies that Papa envisioned himself creating hundreds of these children. His choice of only referring to them with a number and tattooing that number on their forearm feels similar to the concentration camp tattoos. While the United States was on the opposite side during World War II, and Dr. Brenner would always claim that his actions were to protect the United States citizens from evil, he is essentially replicating something similar. From here on out, Dr. Brenner would refer to Henry simply as One. One was able to figure out the source of strength for his powers. By recalling a memory from the past that made him sad but also angry, he was able to channel his telekinesis more reliably. Most of the rest of Henry's childhood is not detailed, but at some point he managed to overpower Dr. Brenner, causing the doc to resort to extreme measures to keep his #1 subject contained. So he created a device called a soteria. The soteria was a microchip that tracked Henry's location, kind of like the GPS in your phone, but more importantly, it was designed to keep Henry from being able to access his own powers. Since Henry draws his power from his sad and angry memories, I'm guessing that Brenner scanned his brain to see which parts of the brain lit up when performing telekinesis. Then he created the device to monitor that part of his brain and cause him pain if he tried to access those memories. Neither Henry or Dr. Brenner ever vividly explain how the soteria works, but later, Dr. Brenner would explain that powers can be lost when the brain is treated as though it has a stroke, with the blood supply being cut off to specific parts and scrambling signals. The soteria would have targeted these angry parts of Henry's brain and scrambled the signals by cutting off the blood supply. The term soteria comes from the Greek goddess of safety or deliverance from harm, which is fitting considering that's what Dr. Brenner realized he would need to use to protect the town of Hawkins from Henry's wrath. But this fix could only hold for so long, until Henry would take his revenge on this small Indiana suburb. As long as Henry had the soteria, he could not use his abilities, and this put him into even more of a prison than he was already in. With the very limited freedom he had to move around the lab, he explored all of its secrets, leading him to discover the boiler, which contained tunnels leading to the outside. However, he could not use them to escape due to the GPS capability of the soteria. Dr. Brenner still had to keep Henry under his watch, but now, with a new generation of kids with mostly similar abilities, Brenner's use for him as a study subject was no longer needed. After using Henry's blood to create 10 more superpowered children, the Department of Defense recommends that Brenner dispose of Henry. But instead, recognizing his obedience over the last few years, Brenner finds a use for him by offering to make him a sort of orderly or employee within the Hawkins lab, hiding the fact that he was number 1. This is when he meets the newest super soldier at the time, number 11, who he would keep a close eye on as he formulated an escape plan. I guess the lab also continued to use the blood that they had drawn from Henry after this, because there are another 7 subjects born after 11. We don't know Henry's exact age when the soteria was implanted, but it can be assumed that it was within the first few years, between 1959 and 1965, prior to any of the other children being born, or at least being old enough to recognize him. This is based on the fact that all of the children in the Hawkins lab, the oldest of which appear to be in their early teens, are taught by Dr. Brenner that one never existed, which is obviously a lie. He should have just claimed that he, as their papa, was number 1 or something, or just come up with something more believable. Dr. Brenner also kept Henry in check by teaching him that acting out would have repercussions. Due to this, Henry falls in line with what Dr. Brenner wants and works as a sort of authority figure to the children, at least for a while. Despite being hampered by the device on his brain, Henry was smarter than Papa realized, and began to formulate a plan of escape. He spent the following years watching the other children, while living under the exact rigid structure that he despised. He played by the rules for most of his young adult life until 1979, when one of the children stood out to Henry as someone he might be able to conspire with. Henry notices that a little girl labeled number 11 does not fit in with the other children and is often picked on and bullied, which is something he finds relatable. In a similar way to how Henry identified with the Black Widow spiders, he identifies with 11 and sees a younger version of himself in her. Henry starts working to secretly talk to 11 without Dr. Brenner, evading the security cameras to do so. He begins working to manipulate 11, which is likely something he learned directly from Dr. Brenner himself. First, he reveals that Dr. Brenner has lied to her and the other children about one's existence, claiming that he knew him. He starts planting seeds of doubt in 11's head by telling her,
"Sometimes, Papa doesn't tell the truth."
He secretly gives 11 pointers for harnessing her power against Dr. Brenner's wishes, by telling her about this time that one recalled a memory that made him both sad and angry, suggesting that she should do the same. He even suggests that she recall the memory of her mother coming to get her from Hawkins' lab and being caught and taken away. The next day, when 11 is training with the other children, her powers outshine the others, despite her being so young and seemingly overpowered. Dr. Brenner notices this because he's given the children specific directions not to do this.
If you allow anger or emotion to invade your thoughts, you will fail.
Dr. Brenner was trying to avoid losing control of the children the way that he did with Henry. He realizes that Henry most likely talked to 11 in secret and taught her to do exactly this, so he punishes Henry for doing so by having lab security guards shock him until he's so weak that he must be carried away. It's possible that Henry intended for 11 to see this, because it helps him in his plan of making him look like a friend and Dr. Brenner look like an abusive enemy, but it's impossible to say for sure. Shortly after, 11 is attacked by the other children who use their powers to beat her until she gets a concussion, while the security cameras are conveniently shut off. Dr. Brenner makes her attackers suffer for doing this, despite 11's unwillingness to tell on them. This leaves the others feeling resentful towards her, and 11 can sense them plotting to attack her again. Henry seizes this opportunity, and while playing a game of chess with Eleven, he tells her that Dr. Brenner is setting her up to have the other children kill her, which really is kind of stupid. If Dr. Brenner wanted Eleven killed, he could probably just put her down with an injection or something. It wouldn't need to be a big conspiracy. But Eleven is young and impressionable, so she believes him, and furthermore, Henry's plan works, and he convinces her that he's the only one that can help her escape the lab to stay alive. He has her secretly meet him in the boiler room, where he shows her a way out through the tunnels underneath the lab. He plays to Eleven's good nature by showing her the soteria, explaining that he is imprisoned by Dr. Brenner, while still not revealing who he really is. He tells her that the soteria is how Dr. Brenner keeps track of him so he can never escape. She falls right into his trap. She's influenced to use her powers to remove the device as if it were her own idea. As the two of them try to escape, they're caught by the guards. Henry seems to expect this, but he acts surprised, and for the first time, uses his powers in front of Eleven to kill the same guards who had tortured him previously. He reveals to her that he is in fact one, showing her the tattoo on his wrist that matches hers. He instructs her to hide in a closet while he finds a way out, but in reality, Henry is putting the finishing touches on the plan that he had been concocting for years. Through the years of watching the other children obediently abide by Dr. Brenner's rules, Henry likely developed a deep resentment that he couldn't wait to unleash. Henry viciously and violently massacres the Hawkins lab, killing all of the children, including the very young and very innocent ones, just as he did to his own sister, his parents, and that one CGI bunny. The plan would have been carried out to a T, but he had just one tiny oversight. Eleven is not quite as easily manipulated as he believed, and leaves the closet where she is horrified by Henry's evil wrath of destruction. When she finds him, he reveals his entire past, convinced she'll understand and do exactly what he wants, join him to restructure the world and rebuild it with her help. But Eleven, despite spending her childhood in what is essentially a prison just like him, doesn't harbor the same resentment towards the world, and she refuses to take his side. Often when the bad guy asks you to join him, there is only one alternative.
You will die.
However, Eleven realizes that her best weapon against Henry is actually to be nothing like Henry. Instead of focusing on memories that make her sad or angry as Henry instructed, she focuses on maybe the only happy memory that she has, her mother telling her that she loves her. This makes Eleven the antithesis, or perhaps the inverse of Henry. Where Henry wants to spread evil, Eleven does the opposite. She regains control, and like Cass from the D&D lore, she betrays him by air yeeting him against a wall with such telekinetic force that she temporarily opens and sends him through a gate into the abyss. Which, as far as we know, is the first time that a gate to the abyss has opened since Brenner pushed him to give in and succumb to the request of the Mind Flayer back in 1959. So it seems like the key to opening a gate to the abyss lies entirely within Henry, because of the powers he inherited from the Mind Flayer after touching the alien rock, because on her own, Eleven never displays any connection to the abyss. It's not known if Brenner or his team working at the lab ever managed to reopen the gate before this, or transport any ships to the abyss under Project Rainbow, but all signs lead to the answer being no. The fact that the super soldier kids are given recess in an area called the Rainbow Room seems to suggest that this MK Ultra program was a successor to Project Rainbow. And if Brenner had the ability to breed more telekinetic children, he didn't really have a reason to risk going back to the abyss. Eleven's choice to focus on a happy memory instead of a sad or angry one is just one of many things that makes her the inverse of Henry. They are mirrored opposites of each other in every way. Where Henry takes pride in torturing small animals, Eleven is punished for refusing to kill a cat. Even their numbers, 001 and 011, are the binary inverse of one another, although this only works if you turn one of them upside down, such as when Eleven first sees his tattoo. Years later, one would operate primarily from the upside down and the other from the real world. Another interesting connection they share is that they both contribute to the creation of the other. One monster creates another. Eleven sends Henry into the abyss where he becomes Vecna, but without Henry's special abilities and Henry's blood, Eleven never would have even existed. After Eleven sends Henry through the gate, it seals itself up pretty quickly, leaving Henry locked in another dimension. As Henry is pushed into the abyss, his skin is ripped apart by the lightning bolts pulsing through the foreign atmosphere, and he's left deformed. But instead of dying or succumbing to the monsters that live there, he uses his telekinetic powers to overtake it and make it his own.
I could restore balance to a broken world, a predator, but for good.
The way the organisms of the abyss operate is in a hive mind. This means that they share a collective consciousness, like honeybees who use special body motions to quickly communicate their findings to the entire hive. In the case of these creatures, they're all linked with telepathy and a network of vines that run all over the realm. So, like a swarm of insects, these creatures can act as individuals or as one big unit. When Henry, or as we can now call him, Vecna, finds the Mind Flayer in the Abyss, he uses his telekinesis to shape the clouds into a spider-like form, the same form as the drawing of the spiders that he created as a kid. But since he's blocked what happened in the cave from his memory, he has no memory of being flayed by the Mind Flayer, and doesn't remember that it was the Mind Flayer who caused him to become fascinated with the spider form factor in the first place. Still, Henry was powerful enough and had enough agency at this point in his life that he could have chosen to resist the Mind Flayer. But after being shown that his world is broken, he chose to join it, and the two became dependent on each other.
It needs me, and I need it.
When Vecna explained to Eleven about how he wanted to destroy society as we know it and create a new one, he was denied that opportunity. But in the Abyss, he could create the world that he wanted, one where everything's connected and under his control. It's only fitting that Henry would defy Dr. Brenner, who wanted to use him as the ultimate weapon against the Soviet Union, and more specifically the spread of communism, that Vecna would create a world that essentially holds the same major ideals of communism. It all functions as one mind under the groupthink of one leader. As a result, if something happens to any organism in the hive mind, from the vines that run over everything to the creatures that live within it, Vecna sees, hears, and feels it. And the same goes for the inhabitants. He essentially had an army of dangerous creatures at his disposal, and it would only be a matter of time before a new gate would be opened. As Vecna spends more time in the Abyss, he starts to look less human and more like one of its native creatures. Since all the inhabitants are linked, when one feels pain, so do the others. This is a defense mechanism, allowing them to swarm on anything that threatens them. But it may also be the reason that when Vecna is found later, he is even more deformed than when he first arrived. As different parts of the hive mind are killed, Vecna is affected. Maybe Vecna could have lived out his days in the Abyss without ever bothering anyone from Hawkins ever again. But as you can probably guess, that doesn't happen. Dr. Brenner has lost most of his subjects and much of his life's work, and probably wants to recoup his investment. So after years and years of research into theoretical physics, Brenner finally cracked the code and managed to create a wormhole. A wormhole is a theoretical tunnel that connects two faraway places in space and time. But Brenner, using the power of exotic matter that I won't get into here, proved that it wasn't so theoretical. This connective tunnel resembled a carbon copy of Hawkins and would later become known as the Upside Down. If I'm not mistaken, it was created on November 6th, 1983, and would forever remain stuck as a snapshot of what Hawkins looked like at the time.
This diary should be full of entries. It's not. The last entry is November 6, 1983.
Dr. Brenner sends Eleven, who at this point has no memory of Henry, to use one of her unique abilities, astral projection, to search in the Upside Down while floating in the sensory deprivation tank. But Dr. Brenner never told her exactly who she was looking for. She would later confront him about this after realizing that she was looking for Henry, but Dr. Brenner insists that he was looking for something to use against Russia. Both are likely true. Whatever the reason, Eleven does not find Henry, but instead finds the Demogorgon, and the mutual reaction between the two of them causes enough energy to open a new pair of gates, one in the Hawkins lab, and one in the wooded area known as Mirkwood, which allows the Demogorgon to cross over into Hawkins, which again is relevant to Vecna because he's the one calling the shots via the Mind Flayer. This is the beginning of the town of Hawkins being terrorized by some... So, on November 6th, the same day that Eleven made contact with the Demogorgon, Will Byers was abducted, and 2 days later, Barb Holland, known colloquially as Brab, is also pulled into the Upside Down, known colloquially as the USD. Actually, scratch that, I don't like that nickname. But the important context here is that the Demogorgon is an agent of Vecna. So the next day, November 9th, when Will warns his mom to run, sending a message through the Christmas lights, that's Vecna sending the creature through the wallpaper to attack her. Then, a few days later on November 12th, Will continued hiding from the Demogorgon in his backyard fort, Castle Byers, with a gun apparently. But Will is chased into a tree and gets knocked unconscious when he falls. That's when he's abducted and taken to Vecna. I like how the Demogorgon kind of bows to Vecna, so there's no doubt about who's in charge here.
At long last, we can begin.
Which is the same thing Stranger Things fans were saying after waiting 3.5 years for a new season. Vecna is the one to implant Will with the slug that I call the Demowog. It's basically stage 1 of a baby Demogorgon's metamorphosis, and it allows Vecna to access Will's thoughts and control him, as he is now a part of the hive mind. It seems Will was chosen as an experiment to see how easy he would be to break as part of Vecna's grand plan to create his own army of telekinetic super soldiers. But we won't get to that for quite some time. Henry could control people's thoughts with his abilities as a kid, but while physically in the Upside Down, Vecna does not seem to have this power over those in the right side up. He has to have that physical connection by implanting a Demowog into his victim, and even then, the telepathic connection only works as long as there's actively a gate open between the two worlds. It's likely that Vecna took this idea from Dr. Brenner, implanting him with the Soteria. While the Soteria was a mechanical control device, this slug functions as a biological one. In autumn of 1984, Vecna uses Will as a means to spy on his enemies, and eventually sends the Mind Flayer to overtake Hawkins by creating a new army in the right side up. While under Vecna's control, Will can be seen drawing pictures of the MF in the same style that Henry drew as a child, which is very different from Will's usual art style. Not only was Will used to spy on the right side up, but apparently he was also used to build the tunnel system underneath Hawkins.
How do you think the tunnels came to be, William? You built them each and every night you slept.
According to Will, he did this by jacking into the hive and taking control of the vines. The only part that I don't get is that if Vecna's controlling Will to control the vines, then why doesn't Vecna just control the vines directly? It's never really explained any further, but we can just assume that Will's physical existence in Hawkins while under the control of the Mind Flayer and Vecna has something to do with it. However, Will's family eventually discovers that the Mind Flayer does not like heat, and they're able to burn that MF right out of him, releasing Will from Vecna's control for the time being. At the same time, 11 closes the gate back at Hawkins' lab, cutting off Vecna from being able to access Hawkins and killing the Demodogs that were stranded there. It is perhaps here that Vecna became fully deformed. Maybe the pain of the dead Demodogs caused him to further break down into the recognizable form seen in season 4. Despite 11 closing the gate, Vecna is given a new opportunity to enter Hawkins the following summer in June of 1985, when the Soviets infiltrate Hawkins and operate in a secret lair underneath the Starcourt Mall, where they try to access the Upside Down using a giant drill. Remember when Dr. Brenner insisted that he was looking for something to stop the Soviets and that was why he sent 11 to explore the Upside Down? Turns out he wasn't technically lying. The US and the Soviet Union were in a secret arms race to weaponize the creatures within the Upside Down. This time, Vecna realizes that he'll need to create a physical monster that he can control so he can have a presence in the right side up version of Hawkins despite not having the ability to astral project. Vecna starts small this time, taking over rodents and doing the same thing he did to that rabbit in the yard. He sends them to an abandoned warehouse known as a Brimborn Steelworks, where he flips them inside out and is able to manipulate that sludge left over into a physical monster. Seeing as how infecting Will was much more effective than sending Upside Down monsters into the real world in the past, Vecna decides to create an army of humans this time, starting with 18-year-old lifeguard Billy Hargrove. Vecna uses the Mind Flayer to pull Billy into the depths of the Steelworks and implant something into him, just like what happened to Will. He then uses Billy to lure more victims into the warehouse, implanting them and effectively creating an entire army of people under his control. Eventually, he summons everyone he's infected back to the Steelworks, where he turns their bodies inside out into a sludge monster, which I like to call the elementary school cafeteria meat form of the Mind Flayer. I really went crazy with the nicknames when making my Stranger Things content, apparently. Once again, this form, like the other, resembles a giant spider in honor of the Black Widows that Henry has always idolized. His overall goal hasn't changed much either. He wants 11, but knowing that she won't willingly work with him, he wants to kill her and absorb her power into the monster. As Dr. Brenner puts it,
When one kills, he doesn't simply kill. He consumes. He takes everything from his victims, everything they are and everything they ever will be. Their memories, their abilities.
That summer, 11 astral projects to find Billy, and she's ambushed when Vecna takes control of Billy's minds to deliver an ominous message.
All this time, we've been building it for you.
It culminates at Starcourt Mall with a battle between 11 and the cafeteria meat monster, which again is basically being controlled by Vecna and the real Mind Flayer. He doesn't manage to kill her, but he does inflict trauma by implanting her with yet another slug from the Upside Down, and he no longer needs the magnetic field to access people as long as a gate is still open. However, as he does this, Joyce Byers and Sheriff Jim Hopper close the gate, cutting off Vecna temporarily. When the doorway between the two worlds opened back up, Vecna could use this power to target victims by reading the thoughts of various people in town until he found someone struggling with feelings of guilt. These people would become his ideal victims. He'd torment them in the same way that he tormented his own family. Vecna would use the skill of astral projection to find people, mostly teenagers, who were tormented with guilt for one reason or another. He justified their deaths in considering himself a predator for good, as he put it, by holding up a mirror to those he felt deserved it, killing them through the torment of their own guilt. Each time he takes a victim using this method, it opens a new gate into Hawkins, which seems to be a part of the greater ritual that he's performing. We've seen gates open in a similar manner, when 11 first sent Henry to the Upside Down, or when 11 defeated the original Demogorgon. It's all part of Henry's plan to eventually merge his world, the Abyss, with planet Earth, with the goal of reshaping the Earth under his ideals. Step 1 is creating a massive fault line by opening 4 gates strategically aligned to cut through Hawkins and destroy it, starting from his old childhood home. If he succeeded, Hawkins would get swallowed up by the Upside Down. The first of his 4 victims is Hawkins High School cheerleader Chrissy Cunningham. His pattern of attack follows what he originally did to his family. Each victim would start suffering from severe headaches, followed by nightmares, followed by hallucinations of the things that they felt most guilt or suffering around. In Chrissy's case, her guilt and torment came from her mother's pressure for her to lose weight and remain thin. Before each victim would be haunted by their own memories, he'd show them the clock inside of his childhood home. It would chime exactly 4 times, 1 for each gate that he intended to open, almost as a calling card, as if he wanted 11 to know that he was behind it. If you saw Stranger Things 4, you probably remember this totally not overused sound effect. Chrissy's first Vecna-induced hallucination was a demented version of her mother in the girls' bathroom at school, berating her for not fitting into a small enough dress. The stress of the hallucinations caused her to turn to D&D master Eddie Munson to buy drugs, hoping that will help her cope, but Vecna reaches her while she's waiting in Eddie's trailer. He pulls her into a trance state, leaving her physical body paralyzed and motionless in the real world, just like he originally did to Victor Creel back in 1959. Once she's mentally trapped in his dreamscape, he torments her with demented visions of her parents and her mother yelling at her until he eventually crushes her head in this giant claw-like hand and consumes her. In the real world, her death resembles the death of Alice in Virginia. Vecna levitates her, squeezes her brain, and breaks her bones. With no physical evidence left behind in the real world, Vecna effectively set Eddie up for murder, the same way that he set his father up all those years ago. With the first of his 4 victims taken care of, he would make quick work of the others. That is, until he gets a rude awakening during his confrontation with Billy Hargrove's little sister. The next victim would be Fred Benson, a nerdy student who's the editor of the high school newspaper. Fred survived a car accident in which another passenger was killed and felt tremendous guilt for it. So Vecna showed him the clock and tormented him with images of the deceased passenger and images of his family and friends blaming him for the death. Vecna, again, would consume Fred the same way as everyone else. The next target was Maxine Mayfield, who was part of Eleven's friend group, along with Will Byers and several others who had fought off creatures from the Upside Down. Max was also Billy Hargrove's stepsister and witnessed the moment that the Mind Flayer killed her brother. Vecna attempts to use her survivor's guilt against her, just as he had with the other victims. However, Max's friends all know about the Upside Down, so they have some idea what they're up against. Nancy Wheeler and Robin Buckley managed to BS their way into the Penhurst Asylum to get an interview with Henry's father, Victor Creel, where he recounts his own experiences, and they see the horrific image of how he carved his own eyes out to escape the torment of Vecna. He reveals that the thing that brought him back from his trance was hearing Ella Fitzgerald "Dream a Little Dream of Me" playing on the radio. From this, they determine that a person's favorite music can pull them out of Vecna's trance. Just as Max is trapped in Vecna's mindscape, her friends scramble to find her favorite song, Running Up That Hill by Kate Bush, and play it for her. For the second time, Vecna is unable to finish off someone he targeted, and Max gets away, for now. However surprising it may be that Max is a Kate Bush fan, it does make sense thematically that she would have to use a song that she loves to escape from Vecna. It fits right into the difference between where Eleven and Vecna draw power from. Vecna thinks about memories of fear and anger, while Eleven goes back to memories of love. Vecna also targets kids who are troubled or depressed, so again, he's feeding off of negativity, and Max is able to escape because of her friends that care about her. Vecna moves on to his next victim, high school basketball player Patrick McKinney. He was likely tormented the same way, however, we're never shown exactly what memories or thoughts were used against him. But he did see the grandfather clock, and the way he died fits the pattern for how Vecna kills. Patrick and his teammate Jason had been going after Eddie Munson and chase him out into the middle of a lake when Vecna chooses to strike, sending Patrick into the trance while he's mid-swim. Patrick is sent shooting out of the water, where he meets the same fate as those before him. This was all enough to open the third gate in the middle of the lake, moving Vecna one step closer to destroying the town. Vecna is not secretive about his plan. Nancy Wheeler is not one of Vecna's originally intended victims, but he chooses to show her his plan by putting her into a trance and sending images into her head as she tries to escape the Upside Down. This is when he shows her his entire plan and his plan for the future, Hawkins being completely swallowed by the Upside Down, which is traumatic for Nancy. Deserved. He also gives her directions.
I want you to tell her everything you've seen.
Which explains why he let her live. Stranger Things was created by a pair of identical twin brothers, Matt and Ross Duffer. Their main villain, Vecna, has sort of a twin as well, and his name is Freddy Krueger. Freddy is obviously known as one of the all-time great horror villains who attacks his victims in a dreamscape while they're asleep. It's very similar to how Vecna lulls his victims into a trance-like mindscape where he torments them by altering what they see. After giving them a good chase, he goes for the kill with his giant claw of a hand, much like Freddy, who slashes his prey with a razor claw glove. Both characters have deformed faces as a result of the town that shunned them. Freddy was set on fire, and Vecna was electrocuted during his banishment to the Abyss. They also both share a connection with a boiler room. The boiler room is where Freddy took his child victims in life, and Vecna manipulated a young 11 by taking her to the boiler room where he tricked her into setting him free. During his kills, Vecna's targets can be seen levitating in the real world before being twisted and contorted in painful ways. It brings to mind the death of Tina Gray, the first to go in A Nightmare on Elm Street. On top of all of that, Robert Englund, the original actor to play Freddy Krueger, also plays Victor Creel, making the idea that Vecna is descended from Freddy Krueger kind of a literal one. While Vecna is carrying out his plan in Hawkins, he needs a safe place to house his physical body in the Upside Down. As we've seen with 11, in order to use the astral projection ability, you need a place to completely disassociate. For 11, that may be a sensory deprivation tank or a pizza freezer. The problem is, this can leave the physical body vulnerable to attack, so Vecna creates an environment in the quiet attic of his childhood home, or at least the Upside Down version, where he taps into the vines, suspending him in midair, giving him easy access to the hive mind. As a result, the vines running all over the house act as an alarm system, so nothing can attack him without being attacked by all of the monsters in the Upside Down first. Nancy and Robin may not have known it yet, but Vecna's reliance on negative memories is both his strength and weakness.
He uses my memories against me. But only my darkest memories. Same with Chrissy and Fred, right?
Right.
It's like he only sees the darkness in us. So I'll just run in the opposite direction. Run to the light. And maybe he won't be able to find me there.
Well, he does. The group is no match for Vecna and its abilities, but lucky for them, they know someone who is. No, it's 11. Despite being physically on the other side of the country, 11 is able to astral project into Max's mind from the back of a faraway pizza shop, which is a whole other side story that isn't relevant to my analysis of Vecna. Max chooses the snowball dance that she attended in 1984 to escape to, as it's one of her happiest memories. However, Vecna finds her and turns the memory into a nightmare, complete with balloons exploding with blood. It looks a lot like the prom scene in Carrie meets the library scene in It, which is fitting considering it wouldn't be Stranger Things without a little reference to Stephen King. Vecna goes after Max, and just as things look hopeless, 11 arrives and throws Vecna off of her, leaving Max extremely confused.
Are you real? Did I make you?
I'm real.
How?
I piggybacked from a pizza dough freezer.
What?
Like I said, it's a whole other story. 11 puts up a good fight against Vecna, but he's able to knock both girls unconscious. He takes them to the main layer of his mind world place, straps 11 against the front door of the Creel house with vines, and hangs Max against the spike, where Chrissy, Fred, and Patrick succumbed to Vecna before her, hoping to make her the fourth and final victim of his ritual. The massive assault on Vecna comes from 3 different directions. The first is within the Mindscape, where 11 has projected herself to try to save Max. The second is in Russia, where Jim Hopper, Joyce Byers, and Murray Bauman fight some of the Demogorgons that are captive there. And the third takes place in the Upside Down, where Nancy, Robin, and Steve are en route to try to destroy Vecna's body. But this plan backfires when the vines from the hive mind catch and pin them against the wall, slowly strangling them. The vines are quickly becoming one of the most potent villains in the series. In the Mindscape, Vecna tells Max to remain very still, and that this will all be over soon, just as he had to her stepbrother the previous year. He starts to consume and kill Max just like his other victims, and as a result, her real body rises into the air and her bones snap in horrible directions. But as this is happening, 11 redoubles her effort, breaks free, and pins Vecna down as she had when she was a tiny child. Part of the reason 11 is able to break free was because Murray Bauman attacked a horde of Demogorgons with a flamethrower just at that moment. Their storyline is mostly disconnected from Vecna to this point, but the hive mind connects everything. Sometimes it's an advantage, but sometimes it's a disadvantage, because when they feel pain, Vecna feels pain. This reaction of the hive mind also causes the vines holding Nancy, Steve, and Robin to be released. If you're warm, they're warm. Put them outside. Now free from their trap, the young adult trio finds where Vecna is hiding in the attic and attacks him with fire as well. He attempts to run and fight back, but with 11 pinning him down inside the Mindscape, he finds himself trapped, which allows Steve and Nancy to incinerate his physical body. The body falls out of the window, but when the group goes downstairs to confirm his death, he's gone. Just as Eddie Munson's uncle had compared Victor to Michael Myers, Vecna disappears the exact same way that the antagonist of the Halloween franchise did. Although it appears that subject number 1 has taken another fat L at the hands of 11 and her friends, that's when the 4th chime is heard, confirming that Max has died and opening the 4th gate. As he had always planned, Hawkins gets ripped apart by a huge fault line opening what appears to be a giant gate into the Upside Down. Vecna probably believed that he had won, that the town would be sucked into the dystopian dimension. But once again, he underestimates the power of love. 11 refuses to let Max die. She puts her hand on her friend's heart and channels her power to get it beating again, bringing Max back from death where she's suspended in a coma. It's almost the reverse of the way that Vecna kills. He uses telekinesis to squeeze his victim's organs, and 11 uses hers as a telekinetic defibrillator of sorts. Upon her revival, Max was pulled into Henry's mind, which was running with memories of his earlier days, such as the Hawkins lab massacre and his days at Hawkins High. But hold on, Henry never could have attended Hawkins High, because as we saw, he arrived in Hawkins in 1959 as a 12-year-old, and this memory appears to be from 1959. The high school memory features Max's discovery of a flyer for a play called Oklahoma, which is directed by Joyce and stars Hopper, both Wheeler parents, Bob Newby's sister, Eddie Munson's father, and Henry Creel himself. It's also set to open on November 6th, the same day that Vecna would later kidnap Will Byers, and he's clearly planning something dark for the anniversary, which is about to happen in a few days.
We are less than 3 days away. I don't believe in coincidences. Not anymore.
There's no way that Henry Creel was in a play with Hopper and Joyce and they just don't remember it. And there's no way Henry could be old enough to attend high school with them. Heck, he couldn't have even attended high school at all. He was institutionalized when he was 12. Which means this memory of the flyer in the Hawkins High hallway must be more of a false memory or fantasy. It makes sense that Henry would be jealous about the older kids who got to have a normal high school experience and fantasize about being a part of it. In my video on 11, I talked about how when she watches the security tapes to fill in the spaces of her lost memories, it's likely that instead of her old memories being unlocked, she's actually creating new false memories based on what she sees in the tapes. And I went into the science of dissociative amnesia to explain why that must be the case. If 11 can enter and explore the mind space of her false memories, I see no reason that Henry cannot create his own fantasy memories and explore those. The other side to this is that this flyer is a reference to the play Stranger Things: The First Shadow, where we see Dr. Brenner turn Henry into a monster while he's in high school, where Joyce is trying to produce this play. You may have seen some slop tubers and content farm articles claiming that the play is canon. And if you Google, is Stranger Things: The First Shadow canon, it will say yes. Therefore, the play is not canon, because everyone knows the AI summary is the stupidest thing ever and is always wrong. There are deep contradictions with the show. In fact, almost everything that happens creates plot inconsistencies. So I decided to look into it. Why are people saying that it's canon? From what I can tell, it goes back to this article on Tudum by Netflix. Tudum is basically a Netflix news site that comes from Netflix. In their article about the play, they pose the question, is the Stranger Things play canon to the Stranger Things universe, and is it a prequel to the TV show? Where they say, absolutely. And since Netflix is the publisher of Stranger Things, this seems like the official word. However, there's no source cited, leading me to believe that this is the word of the author of this article, which is someone named Tara Bitran, who just seems to be a beat writer who isn't actually involved in Stranger Things. But there's also this People.com interview with Kate Treyfry, who wrote the play and is also a writer for Stranger Things, where she said that it had to be canon. However, the co-creator of Stranger Things, Ross Duffer, told BBC, as we're writing the final season, we weren't able to make sure that everything is lining up, when asked about the play. He also added, we're trying to treat everything in the play as a standalone story. It feels a little like they're trying to distance the show from the play without coming out and saying that it's not canon. And in my opinion, look, Oklahoma is not my first rodeo. I've seen this before when Harry Potter got a stage adaptation called Harry Potter and the Cursed Child. It was a similar situation where the play just didn't match up with the established story, but the creators still insisted that it was canon. This wasn't quite the same situation as the Cursed Child though. Clearly there was some effort put in to make the show reference the stage play. There are just these honestly kind of baffling inconsistencies that make it impossible to fully consider the First Shadow canon. That's why at the beginning of this video, I labeled it as soft canon, meaning that we can use some of the broad ideas, but not every little detail should be strictly considered canon. The same thing has happened with other officially licensed media, such as the books and comics. They come out, and then they're canon, until they're not. We've been down this road before. A big apology to all the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles x Stranger Things fans out there though. But to tie this all together, I think there is a way that the First Shadow could be kinda canon, and that is if my theory is correct and Max is viewing a false memory here, meaning the entirety of the play exists inside Henry's head as a fantasy version of the events. Anyway, Max was trapped in Vecna's mind while stuck in her coma. It may or may not be because Max didn't actually die, but Hawkins doesn't fall completely into the Upside Down as Vecna had shown in the vision. But significant damage is still done, leaving a huge crater running through the middle of town. At this point, we can clearly see the moral of the story is not to move to the suburbs. In the 19 months following the showdown with Eleven, Vecna mostly lays low, spending his time healing from the explosives hurled at him in the attic. This time, he does what he probably should have from the beginning and operates from the safety of the Abyss. At some point, he creates or encounters a new physical body for the Mind Flayer, which takes the form of an absolutely massive spider creature. It's not exactly clear if this is the Mind Flayer's true form or if it's just a vessel that the MF takes over, but personally, I think it was an alien creature that the Cloud entity moved into, because Henry was the one to form the Cloud entity into a spider-like form in the first place, because he was drawn to them after discovering them in the attic as a child. Henry establishes a new home inside the giant spider, which sits dormant in the desert. He recharges in a huge room under the arachnid's heart, which is set up with 12 pillars to eventually play a part in his 1987 plan. First, Vecna scouts out kids to be his new vessels, basically his own versions of Dr. Brenner's test subjects that he could control. This scouting process takes place on Halloween 1987.
This was Halloween. I hadn't met Henry yet.
We can tell it's Halloween 1987 because he spies on Holly Wheeler while she's watching A Nightmare on Elm Street 3 on VHS, and the VHS was released on August 5th, 1987. I know I already talked about the Freddy Krueger parallels earlier, so I'm sure the significance is not lost on you, but keep in mind that Dream Warriors was the first movie in the Nightmare franchise that really embraced the idea of the main characters entering the dream world together, interacting there, and discovering their own dream powers that make them special, which is especially applicable to what's about to happen here in Stranger Things. Over the next 3 days, Henry begins appearing to certain children in Hawkins by posing as Mr. Whatsit, the supposed male counterpart to the character Mrs. Whatsit from the popular children's novel A Wrinkle in Time. To outsiders, like parents and teachers, it looks like the kids are talking to an imaginary friend. But he doesn't accomplish this the same way that Kali Prasad made people see things that weren't there. While Kali created illusions that everyone could see, Vecna invades the mind of his target, creating the illusion only within that person's mindscape. We know this because when Will taps into the hive mind to see what Vecna sees, if Vecna is inside the mind of another kid, Will just sees that kid's POV.
Were you seeing through the eyes of Vecna or of Derek?
Both. I was Vecna, but inside Derek's mind.
Vecna started by stalking his victims and invading their minds like this in order to learn everything about them before making contact. Then, when he did make contact, he told the kids that there were monsters in Hawkins who were probably going to eat them, which probably seemed believable. If I were a kid in Hawkins, I would probably pick up on the increased paranoia from parents and teachers as a result of all of the child deaths over the last few years. Brab, Heather, Billy, Chrissy, Fred, Eddie Munson, those basketball players Patrick McKinney and Jason Carver, Max for a minute, Will Byers for a minute, like half of the cast's careers once Stranger Things ends. The whole idea behind Vecna's lies was to gain the kids' trust. Apparently, even though he's hiding his identity by posing as Mr. Whatsit, he also tells Holly Wheeler that his name is Henry, which seems like it would give things away if Holly talked to her siblings, but I guess he was so confident that his plan was going to work that it wouldn't matter if they tried to warn her about Henry. Anyway, the next anchor date on the timeline is November 3rd, 1987. We know Vecna had been quiet up until then because Will has an episode where the sky is spinning via his connection to the hive mind, and it's treated as unusual. That day, Vecna speaks to Holly Wheeler again while she's at school, warning her about the monsters to set the seeds for later. But there's one potential mole in his operation. Max Mayfield is still trapped in the realm of Henry's memories, and when she hears her favorite Kate Bush song being played from the real world, it creates a window into reality, where she sees Lucas waiting at her bedside. Vecna also notices this, and he gets there first, cutting off her escape before finally discovering her. I know Vecna is more intimidating, but I feel like it would be kind of scary from his point of view, going into your own memories and finding an intruder. Max is able to run deeper into his mindscape, where she sees him transform from his post-lab massacre form into the claw-handed upside-down monster, but eventually reaches the cave entrance and becomes afraid to go any further.
There's something about this cave, this memory. He won't come in.
So Max turned this cave into her sanctuary, but Vecna wasn't going to let this hiccup alter his plans. Since I'm piecing the timeline together, my understanding is that his goal was to send the Demogorgon out to kidnap Holly Wheeler, but the creature happened to come across the military convoy in the Upside Down first and attacks them, which may explain why this Demogorgon doesn't stick around to kill off Hopper. During the abduction, Mrs. Wheeler does manage to wound the Demogorgon with a broken wine bottle, but my interpretation was that Holly was knocked out by this creature, and when she came to, she was told by Henry, aka Mr. Whatsit, that he had saved her. But in reality, she was taken to the Abyss, where she was suspended in a sort of induced coma inside the Mind Flayer's body, much like Will was in 1983, which is why I think that this is how it went down. We saw how Will was captured. Meanwhile, within the Mindscape, they appeared to be in an old-fashioned suburbia, where Holly stays in the house that Henry grew up in.
Where are we? In a memory, which exists inside a world of 1,000 memories. I know it might look nice, but it's not. This place, this world, it's a prison. Henry's prison.
The realm seems to consist of a mix of memories, including the Creel house in Indiana and a red rocky mesa from his previous home in Lincoln County, Nevada. The next day, November 4th, Holly stays at the house with him, and I assume this is also when he kidnapped 3 other kids, because we see more victims stuck in that induced coma with the upside down vines inside the sanctum. Each kid is suspended on a spire, and there are a total of 12. He's most likely recreating the army of super soldiers that he killed off in the Hawkins lab, but this time he's creating them to serve him, not Brenner. Remember, he invited 11 to join him, and she refused, so the difference now is that he's trying to mold them before their powers are developed. And he tries to win Holly's loyalty in a way that probably would have worked on 11 if he had tried, with an extravagant breakfast. He assures her that her parents are still healing and will join them soon over a sugary blackberry pancake feast, which I do find to be an interesting parallel. It's the same tactic used by Hopper when he's trying to win 11's trust, but Hopper knew that 11 loved waffles because of their time spent together. Henry's deluxe breakfast is built on lies and deception.
I thought blackberries might cheer you up a little. They're your favorite, aren't they?
How did you know that they were my favorite?
Oh, it's just a hunch. I'm good with hunches.
It's another example of 11's love versus Henry's vindictiveness. And that afternoon, the limits of his control over Holly would be tested. While Henry is away manipulating his next victim during the day, he promises Holly the house to herself as long as she stays there and never goes out into the woods. This is probably to ensure that she stays within his illusion, and could be because he's aware that Max Mayfield is out there in the memory realm. He bribes her with presents, a cassette player and Tiffany's self-titled album, which he knows she wanted based on another hunch. His next target is Derek Turnbow, a kid who is so awesome in ways I cannot even begin to describe. Vecna tells Derek that the same monster that kidnapped Will Byers, aka Zombie Boy, a few years ago is coming for more children. After selecting a Demogorgon that he believes is strong enough to take Derek, which is certainly debatable, he plans the abduction for that night, but things go awry when Will Byers gets wind of his plan, relocates the Turnbow family, and sabotages the house with a trap that captures the Demogorgon in barbed wire. Now we know where Jigsaw got the idea for Paul Leahy. To further complicate things, Vecna is kept in the dark about Derek's true location, because Derek has been tranquilized by a pie laced with heavy sedatives. But because Derek is an absolute unit, the sedatives don't keep him down for very long.
I thought he ate like 2 slices of pie. He did. Why is he awake then?
When he comes to, Vecna sees through his eyes and recognizes where he is, relays that information to the hive mind, and the Demogorgon is sent en route to their location. It's the same thing that happened with Will when he heard the phone ring and gave away his location in 1984. However, the Demogorgon is unsuccessful, so Vecna sends in the big guns the following day. The battle begins when Derek helps sneak some of the kids that Vecna had targeted out of the military base, hoping to get them to safety. You know, into the protection of someone who actually knows a thing or two about the upside down creatures. But just as they reach the outside, the onslaught begins. Vecna sends a small army of Demogorgons to battle an actual army of the US, including probably the biggest Demogorgon we've ever seen. This is probably the part where you turn to me and ask how this fits into the whole US versus Soviet Union metaphor that I've talked about in several of my Stranger Things analysis episodes. And I honestly have no idea. I don't think this part necessarily does line up with that, because that was the whole thing with the Cold War. It wasn't an actual war, and this certainly is. Mike Wheeler tries to navigate the kids that Vecna is targeting through the battlefield to safety, but that's when the original experiment, Vecna himself, emerges from the gate for the first time ever. I may not be able to talk about the geopolitical significance here, but I can analyze Vecna's appearance. Perhaps as a result of the burns he endured the previous year, he looks darker. His armor looks sharper, more regal, and more intimidating than ever. It also seems to be alive, like his body is made up of a series of tendrils that are all moving on their own. His new appearance not only does more to make it feel like he's become more a part of the hive mind and less a part of the human race, but I don't know, the shoulders make him feel like he's some kind of army general now. Like he survived the last attack and gained even more accolades in the hierarchy of the creatures. It's like how Captain Crunch just feels like he has more authority than Wendell from the Cinnamon Toast Crunch box. What is wrong with my brain? The army shifts their focus to him, but he's unfazed by the gunfire, and his new look seems to come with new abilities, like the power to stretch out his appendages to impale victims, and the ability to create a telekinetic force field to protect himself from the burn of the flamethrowers, and even reverse the blast at his ops. Vecna is more locked in than ever, pulling grenade pins and air-yeeting the soldiers that they're attached to make human hand grenades. He single-handedly ends the battle. When he finds his target, his original target, Will Byers, he levitates him in the air for a face-to-face discussion where he sheds a little bit of light on his plan to use the kids as soldiers.
You know why I chose them to reshape the world. It's the Because they are weak.
Yeah, that makes sense. Weak people are always taking over the world. Like Wendell. Okay, I think he's actually referring to the ability to mold them easily, to make them do his bidding. Remember when I said that Vecna's grand plan was to create his own army of super soldiers, but we won't get to it for quite some time? That time has come. With that, he drops Will and retreats into the Upside Down. His message was apparently sent, and he felt confident to let the creatures of the Upside Down finish things up. He just wasn't counting on Will not being quite as weak as he'd predicted. Will single-handedly snaps the limbs of all of the attacking Demogorgons. But would that even have an impact on Vecna's master plan? Back at his sanctum inside the Mind Flayer, Vecna implants each of the newly captured children with vines, allowing him to import each of them into his mindscape, once again peddling the story that he saved each of them from the monsters, which he says are caused by a darkness spreading over Hawkins.
You can think of this darkness like the Black Thing in your book.
The Black Thing is basically this cosmic evil in A Wrinkle in Time that is implied to be the master of the book's main antagonist, the floating brain creature It. Like the Mind Flayer, the Black Thing is depicted as a huge dark cloud. He tells the kids that he's discovered a faraway world that is a lot like Earth, but free of monsters and darkness. He's most likely referring to the Abyss, which as far as I can tell is not free of monsters at all. There is one part about his speech that he's honest about though, telling them that they were specifically chosen because of the powers lying dormant in their minds.
And I believe if we work together, we can awaken those powers, channel our energy, and draw this new world to ours.
Holly, get that look off your face. He's gonna realize something is up. He tells them that it all begins tomorrow, which of course is November 6th, 1987, the 4-year anniversary of Will's kidnapping.
You know what date it is, right?
It's Stranger Things Day. Funny how in real life we celebrate one of the darkest days in the show's lore as if it's a holiday. At least May the 4th and 128 are kind of celebrating something positive. Despite choosing his subjects because he thought they'd be easy to control, not all of them turn out to be. Holly Wheeler and Derek Turnbow escape the house into the woods. So Henry tracks Derek down and finds that he has something that it should be impossible for him to have, a map of the Mindscape. And I don't think anyone's ever looked less afraid of him, kid or adult.
Who gave you this map?
Your mom!
However, Henry does scare some sense into him, threatening to kill his family while using his psychic illusion ability to show the remains of each of his family members with their eyes hollowed out. Derek is sent back to the house as Henry goes on to look for Holly, who he later finds in the deep recesses of his memories, trying to escape with the aid of Max. After locating them in the depths of his memory realm, Henry Creel slams the door shut on the fleeing Holly and Max before transforming into his meaner-looking Lab Massacre skin, and shortly after, his final form, which he uses to grab and strangle Max.
At long last, the fox is caught.
However, he finds himself unable to finish her off, and that's because he's not the only one who can play mind games. And I'm not talking about Nancy or her dating life. Will Byers taps in and briefly takes control of Henry, snapping his leg like me trying to fit spaghetti into a small pot, and then briefly taking control of his entire body to deliver a message to Max, telling her it's time to run, which should have been obvious. Will's control over Henry is short-lived, and he's able to regenerate his broken leg, but Max and Holly are able to escape his clutches for now, and he's left with a limp. His attempts to paint Max as a liar fail, as do his promises that he's gonna make Max suffer if Holly doesn't come out of the cave. But he does have one trick up his sleeve. Will has now been sucked into his mindscape as well, so Vecna traps him in the same vine coil that he was trapped in during his initial capture as a kid. He taunts him with the fact that he only joined the hive mind because Vecna let him, in order to use him as a spy. He boasts that his powers are stronger than ever and that he's planning on using his new vessels to usher in a new and better world. To do that, he'll need to recapture Holly, and he's got a plan to use Will to make that happen.
You are going to be my spy. One last time.
With that, he digs his huge claws into Will's head. After this, Will's mind is invaded, and despite his best efforts, he's unable to hide his memories of the hospital and the room number 412 where Max is being kept. It's a significant achievement because Will is someone who has always had to hide his true thoughts and feelings, except for that one time in the car, but he's unable to hide anything from Vecna. On the other hand, Max is technically in a trance during the 19 months that she's captured in Henry's mindscape, but from the outside, it looks like she's in a coma. So you'd think that Henry might have just figured out that she was at the hospital without having to dig into Will's mind, because where else would someone in a coma be? But I guess he didn't think that one through. Since Max is the one aiding Holly and keeping him from collecting all of his vessels, killing Max in the real world would remove her from the mindscape and make it easier to manipulate Holly again. So he sends his Demodogs to the hospital with orders to find and devour Max. Demodogs. However, it didn't work, because these Demodogs were apparently the Dummodogs. Because of this, Holly and Max escape from Henry's memory realm. As soon as he realizes that, he takes it upon himself to try to stop her from getting any further, exiting the Mindscape and descending from his command center in the Inner Sanctum. He awakens in time to see her uncovering a gate from the wasteland of the Abyss back to the Upside Down. But she finds herself upside down and falls down into the interdimensional realm. Vecna has to use his telekinesis from a distance to snipe her and bring her descent to a halt before aerating her back towards the abyss. As someone who has tried to do the same to objects that I dropped off the Sky Islands and Tears of the Kingdom, I gotta say, Vecna's range here is pretty impressive. After returning her to the Sanctum, she's wired back into the memory realm and, once inside, returns to bed in the Creel house. Some of the other kids that Henry is shaping into his vessels express concern for Holly's well-being, so he decides to use that to his advantage to gaslight her. And this is another perfect example of Henry's fatal flaw, his reliance on fear rather than love. In his initial battle with Eleven, her channeling of happy memories allowed her to overpower his negative energy. Now, as he's trying to raise a new batch of subjects, he's making sure that they're motivated by fear and lies. While Holly was asleep, he tells the kids that Max was a monster in a human disguise, that she works for the Black Thing, and that she filled Holly with lies.
She told her I kidnapped you.
What? You rescued us.
I know.
Pretty good performance, gotta hand it to him. Maybe he has a little bit of a drama background after all. He acts like without Holly, they have no hope and the Black Thing will win, which naturally motivates the kids to want to talk to Holly and, as they put it, bring her back to the light. This is a form of psychological manipulation called subconscious suggestion, the process of influencing a person's thoughts, feelings, or behavior by planting ideas without the person realizing it. I guess there's just not enough horror fans out there to make the number next to the subscribe button say 2M. So the kids decide to try to sway Holly back to the light. Then, for some reason, they all start chanting this over and over.
We can do it.
Back to the light.
Back to the light.
Back to the light. Back to the light.
Back to the light. Back to the light. Back to the light. Back to the light. Back to the light.
Which, for my money, has got to be the funniest, but also like worst and most unrealistic scene in the whole show. Because why do they just go from 6-year-olds to cult members just like that? Anyway, when Holly wakes up, they keep doing the talking in unison thing.
Welcome back, Holly.
Welcome.
Welcome.
I'm not sure how that's supposed to bring her to their side. Personally, I'd just be creeped out by it. I guess Holly felt the same, because instead of joining their groupthink, she tries to fight her way out, but the other kids overpower her. This seems to bully her into compliance, so with all 12 vessels ready, Henry blocks out the windows and leads a candlelight ritual where each of the subjects joins hands and the telekinetic transference begins. By channeling the power of each of the 12 kidnapped kids, the final stage of Henry's plan goes into motion, causing the Abyss itself to sink through the Upside Down on a collision course with Hawkins. But just when it seems like nothing can stop him, everything suddenly becomes a blur, and Henry loses control. 11 had infiltrated the Mindscape and broken his connection with the kids. When he makes it back into the house, his vessels are gone, and his rival 11 is waiting for him. Making the best he can of the circumstances, he infiltrates her mind for information. So she infiltrates his mind while he infiltrates her mind. How many layers deep can this go? He realizes that Max is fleeing with the kidnapped kids, so thinking fast, he creates a false illusion for Chief Hopper, who is keeping watch of Eleven's physical body in the real world. This causes Hopper to panic and pull 11 out of the Mindscape, which for my money has got to be the most clever use of the false illusion ability. He reaches Holly and the fleeing kids, but not before they've reached the cave, the one area of his memory that he hasn't been able to access. He gets there just as the last two kids are running inside, but even extending his reach to pull Holly out into the sunlight is no match for the pulling power of Derek. This was especially hilarious to me because I'd been joking around on social media for weeks that they simply needed to have Derek tackle Vecna, and lo and behold, he actually gets his chance to overpower him. What a moment. However, Henry had basically been undermined by 11 every step of the way, in the Rainbow Room, when she rescued Max in 1986, and now. He couldn't bear the thought of losing the kids he had worked so hard to manipulate, so for the first time, he pushes through the discomfort of his painful memories and enters the cave. Which means, for the first time in 32 years, he would have the opportunity to confront his most traumatic childhood memory. He's attacked by Holly, who cuts open his face with the fire poker. But before he has a chance to kill her, he's distracted by the scene of his 8-year-old self coming across the Russian spy. I think the fact that his body motions mimic those of his memory is important, because it shows us that he's repressed these memories for so long that he's basically experiencing them for the first time again. We saw the same thing when I analyzed 11 and talked about her reviewing her memories during the Nina project. But as always, there's a difference that separates him from 11. She dives into her memories to find strength through the power of love, whereas Henry pushes himself through his memories out of insecurity and fear.
He's in a memory now, and he's scared. He's so scared.
It's also fitting that Stranger Things as a whole ended up making memory such an important theme, because the whole backdrop of the show appeals to the 1980s nostalgia and memories of a time period idealized by the show's creators. We see the heroes basking in peanut butter boppers and Back to the Future, memories that the creators seem to cherish, while the villains usually are associated with less happy aspects of the time period, like the Cold War and Satanic Panic. Despite their similarities, it's no mistake that memory affects 11 and Vecna in very different ways. When he recalls the moment that he touched the alien rock, he experiences that pain over again, like he's experiencing it for the first time. And when Will, who is watching all this because he's part of the hive mind, realizes that the young Henry was a victim of the Mind Flayer, not too different from his own experience, Henry is reduced to a sniveling child. He literally tells Will, "Leave me alone," like a kid having a meltdown on the playground. It's a powerful statement. Throughout this, and all of my Stranger Things videos, I've highlighted how the hive mind creatures embody the ideals of communism through groupthink and lack of privacy. All along, Vecna had used Will, Billy Hargrove, and the Demo creatures as his spies. But when someone else is seeing his vulnerable moment, all of a sudden he's ready to abandon the ideals of communism and ask to be left alone, a request that he never granted to Will when he was younger. But as always, there's a difference with Henry. Where Will eventually learned to resist and use his connection to the hive mind to fight back, Henry actually chose to become one with the Mind Flayer. And speaking of the Mind Flayer and its communist ideals, it wasn't about to go down without a war. This whole thing started with the MF showing Henry that his world was broken. The MF adopted his ideal that the spider was the ultimate predator who would feed on the weak. So it was time for the Mind Flayer, in its ultimate arachnid form, to rise up and protect that ideal by crushing the humans that were now threatening it in the abyss. Only there was one human, more so than any other, who would stand in his way, and her name was 11. After ascending to the abyss, breaking through the Mind Flayer's body into the sanctum, and cutting down Vecna from his control center, it was time for a real battle in the physical world. The first such confrontation between the two since the battle in the Rainbow Room 8 years earlier, where Henry was banished to the abyss in the first place. He should have had an advantage this time, with his upgraded body of tendril armor and his recently adopted appendage stretch attack. And at first, he does seem to get the upper hand on her, telekinetically slamming her onto the ground on multiple occasions. But the tide turns when the battlefield that they're fighting inside of loses balance, and Vecna, as part of the hive mind, feels pain whenever the Mind Flayer takes a hit on the battle going on outside. It's so fitting that all along, the major limitation of Vecna's strength was that he drew his power from fear and anger, while 11 drew hers from love. That's how she defeated him in the Rainbow Room, and now it was the love that 11's friends have for her, fighting for her on the outside, that literally weakens Vecna enough for 11 to take a telekinetic hold over him and try to force him into this huge spike. At the last moment, he tries to lash out at her, but again, it's the love of 11's friends that stops him, this time in the form of Will Byers, who is no longer afraid of his former captor, allowing him to snap Vecna's arm off. Notably, he loses his claw hand, the injured limb that caused him to be flayed as an 8-year-old, and the tool of destruction that he used to kill so many kids in Hawkins. Ultimately, this allows Elle to impale him, and he seemingly dies in tandem with the Mind Flayer. I say seemingly dies because a couple minutes later, he begins to choke and struggles to hold on to his life. But this is less the start of a new comeback and more of an opportunity for Joyce Byers to deal the final blow with an axe, as she recalled all of the pain that Vecna had caused her and her family over the last 4 years. In the end, the reason that Vecna was defeated was because even through his rejection of the human world and his unwavering attempts to become something that he saw as stronger, he was unable to escape the true nature of what he really was.
Underneath all those scars, he's still human. A psychopath with a serious god complex, but human. I guess we're all scared of something, right?
In the beginning, Henry was just a boy who had an unfortunate thing happen to him. So many characters experienced something similar. Will Byers, 11, and Chief Hopper in particular. But each of those characters learned to cope with their unfortunate situation thanks to the love and support of those that they cared about. And although there were struggles along the way, each of them ended up alright in the end. But when Henry was faced with the choice to join or resist the Mind Flayer, he gave in, and allowed fear to dictate his life from that point forward. As a kid, he was able to harness his powers through fear and anger, but when he squared off with 11, it became clear that these very human emotions were holding him back. Instead of changing his ways, he doubled down, building an entire army of alien creatures because he was unable to face the truth staring him in the face. The fact that he was only human. 8 years and several evil plots later, he still hadn't learned the reason for his undoing, and in the end, he paid the price for it. One of the things I loved about analyzing Vecna was looking at what makes him so different from so many of the other Stranger Things characters. So I highly recommend checking out my whole playlist. I've done episodes on so many characters in the series. You can find that on the left. Also, if you're interested in pop punk and metal band history done in this style, check out my other channel, Pumpkin Metal, in the description. But if you love horror, you'll definitely want to subscribe to CZsWorld for new horrors every week, ring the death bell for all notifications, and I will see you in the next one. Assuming we both survive.